From the broadcast center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon and welcome to your 12 o'clock news update. I'm Nathan Maley and here's what's going on. Vancouver City Council is meeting today to discuss a mid-year funding boost for police and firefighters. The city says overtime and other expenses are the leading cause the staff needs to be addressed before slipping into a deficit. Vancouver Police Department would need an additional $2.47 million to cover fringe benefit adjustments and $3.6 million for overtime expenses. The city staff has also recommended the fire department recover just under $6 million to cover fringe benefit adjustments and overtime costs. More details on the story will unfold as the day progresses. Liberal MP Ken Hardy is now walking back his comments he made about a Winnipeg shooting over the weekend. Hardy questioned if there was a link between Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and the fatal shooting. Hardy now says the comments made on Twitter was inappropriate.
There was no direct link, none whatsoever, and so in that respect, posting it that way was, entirely inappropriate on my part. I did not know that that's the way it would be taken, but that's the reality that some people have. So yeah, I do apologize for that.
Hardy had previously said he was standing by the post and wouldn't apologize for it. Dozens of animals were seized from what is being described as an unsanitary home. Animal welfare workers rescued 44 dogs and cats who were living in a small island community off Nanaimo. Some animals were reportedly found inside the walls of the home, and there was no apparent food or water for them. The carpet was apparently filled with animal feces, and large amounts of garbage were all over the room. All animals are being transported to the Nanaimo SPCA, where they will then be distributed across Vancouver Island SPCA shelters for treatment. It is unknown if the rescued animals will be made available for adoption. Animal cruelty charges are expected to follow. The provincial government announced changes to housing rules recently that could impact housing projects in the province. This caught Coquitlam City Council by surprise, and they decided to take action on protecting current projects, as Jerison Orshon summarizes what happened at the City Council meeting last night.
Mayor Richard Stewart and City Council unanimously agreed to send letters to Premier David Eby and Minister of Housing Ravi Kahlon in response to changes to the Homes for People Action Plan announced earlier in April. Through a series of amendments proposed in the BC legislature, changes include revised guidelines that municipalities have to implement to their housing policies, no public hearings on projects, and possible budget cuts. The city has multiple projects in the works that could be either delayed or cancelled, including the building of a community center in the Burke Mountain neighborhood. City Council hopes that the letters will lead to consultations with the provincial government on the changes. Jerison Orshun, 1680, The Crow.
Jerison was kind enough to join us in studio today. So, Jerison, what are the other changes in the new housing rules proposed by the provincial government?
Well, Nathan, when new projects are announced, there will be no public consultations on them because, which means that municipalities will not be able to give their opinions on the impacts of those developments. But also, city staff would have to scramble to make sure that the current projects they have are meet the new rules.
And what is the timeline with the new rules?
So in the next few months they'll receive manuals on containing these new rules, and they would have to revise their city housing policies to make sure that it's all within the meets the rules. And then the following year they would have to have to meet those requirements by the end of the year. Back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Harrison. BCIT had a general meeting on campus last night. Our reporter Kobe Smith has the details.
The annual general meeting happens in November within 6 months of the fiscal year ending in May. Celine L'Oreal, the president of BCIT Student Association, explains about the AGM.
The purposes of an annual general meeting, or AGM, accomplishes a couple of our objectives. We are incorporated as a not-for-profit under BC law, and this requires us to hold an annual general meeting once per year. We consider improvements to our rules and procedures, receive an update on the audited financial statements, and hear the Executive Director's annual management report for the organization.
This gives an opportunity for council members and students to hear about the updates about BCIT and also about the rising cost in tuition. Kobe Smith, 1680, The Crow.
One local nonprofit is helping to solve food waste and insecurity by redirecting food from restaurants and grocers to other nonprofits. Our reporter Caitlin No has the story.
Vancouver Food Runners uses app technology and a team of volunteers to pick up surplus food once a week that those in need can access from nonprofits across the city. Michelle Reining, the executive director of Vancouver Food Runners, says they redirect 100,000 pounds of food every month.
Right now in BC, 1 in 7 households are food insecure. The food donations are used in community meals, food hampers, or even for direct food provision.
They also have drop-offs to community fridges where individuals can access food within certain neighborhoods. Caitlin No, 1680 The Crow.
Workers at 7 long-term care homes in BC have ratified a new contract with Good Samaritan Canada. Workers had gone more than 3 years without a new deal. A statement from the Hospital Employees Union was released and says nearly 11,000 workers have ratified the collective agreement. It will prevent contracting out, protects their wages, and enhances benefits and shift differentials. It is a 5-year contract that is set to expire in April of 2025. The long-term care homes operate in New Westminster, Gibsons, Penticton, Kelowna, Vernon, and Salmon Arm. NATO foreign ministers have begun a 2-day meeting in Brussels to discuss Ukraine and ways to ease tension between Kosovo and Serbia. Tom Rivers of ABC News has more.
Pounding the same drum this time before Alliance foreign ministers, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg framing his argument that if Russia were to succeed...
And the message to all authoritarian leaders, not only in Moscow but also in Beijing, is that when they violate international law, when they invade another country, when they use force, they get what they want.
What more European states now want is a way out of their economic downturn and high energy costs that the conflict has brought them. Tom Rivers, ABC News at the Foreign Desk.
Former U.S. First Lady Rosalynn Carter's funeral was held in Atlanta today. Husband Jimmy Carter, who is 99 years old, was in attendance despite his own health issues. Their son, James Earl Carter III, reflected on the times he had growing up with his parents.
I will always love my mother. I will cherish how she and Dad raised their children. They've given us such a great example of how a couple should relate.
The tribute today was the second of a 3-day schedule of events celebrating Carter. TransLink has announced that 9 reindeer buses will be returning for the holiday season. The West Coast Express Santa train will also return for 2 Saturdays in December. The buses collect and deliver toys to families in need as part of the Toys for Tots program. Toys for Tots delivers the donations they receive from the buses to the Lower Mainland Christmas Bureau on December 15th. Over to sports now. The Chicago Blackhawks have announced that forward Corey Perry is being placed on unconditional waivers for the purpose of contract termination. According to the team statement, an internal investigation determined that, quote, Perry engaged in conduct that is unacceptable and violates his contract, end quote. Perry missed 2 games before general manager Kyle Davidson announced he would be away from the team for the foreseeable future on Saturday. Perry was acquired in the offseason from the Lightning to be a leader for rookie phenom Connor Bedard. Perry scored 4 goals and 5 assists in his short-lived 16-game career with the Blackhawks. Free agent forward Patrick Kane has made his decision as the 3-time Stanley Cup champion is signing with the Detroit Red Wings for a 1-year, $2.75 million deal. Kane underwent hip resurfacing surgery in the offseason and has been rehabbing the injury all summer. Kane reunites with ex-Chicago Blackhawks teammate Alex DeBrincat in Hockeytown. The former first overall pick spent his entire career with the Blackhawks prior to being dealt to the New York Rangers at last year's trade deadline. Detroit players seem ready to welcome him as forward Daniel Sprong has already offered his number 88 jersey to Kane, the number he's worn his whole career. The Minnesota Wild introduced new head coach John Hynes today. Hynes was hired following yesterday's firing of Dean Evason. Wild general manager Bill Guerin is hoping Hynes will provide a new message to get through to his struggling team.
With the coaching change, hey, look, it's look at the slate's clean for the guys. It's it's a new day, it's a new voice. They're going to get a new message.
The first game of the Hynes era in Minnesota is set for tonight as the Wild will host the St. Louis Blues. Puck drop is set for 5 p.m. On to football now. The Chicago Bears took down the Minnesota Vikings last night by a score of 12-10. Vikings quarterback Joshua Dobbs struggled in the loss, throwing 4 interceptions. Bears kicker Cairo Santos made the game-winning kick with 10 seconds left to win the game.
To hold Trenton Gill. Cairo Santos, 08, snap, right hash, angle left, Santos the kick. Santos is good from 30 yards.
The Vikings fall to 6-6 on the year, while the Bears move to 4-8. Both teams will have their bye next week. To baseball now, the Toronto Blue Jays could be primed for a major offseason shakeup. According to The Athletic's Ken Rosenthal, the Blue Jays have been getting calls for first baseman Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and shortstop Bo Bichette. Both players are yet to sign long-term contracts and are both 2 years away from hitting free agency. Guerrero is coming off a down season for both hitting and fielding. Bichette had another strong campaign with the bat and showed much improvement in the field. The reports come out just one day after the Blue Jays were reportedly chasing two-way superstar Shohei Ohtani. A new study finds that soccer may affect your brain function over the years. Chuck Severson of ABC News has more.
Increased heading, or hitting a soccer ball with your head, has been linked with concussion-like brain function changes and lower verbal learning performance in 2 studies. They were conducted by researchers at Columbia University and presented at the Radiological Society of North America annual medical conference. In both studies, adult amateur soccer players were categorized in groups of low to moderate headers or high. Brain MRIs were done at the beginning and after 2 years. Verbal learning was tested after 1 year. Chuck Severson, ABC News.
That does it for your 12 o'clock news update. I'm Nathan Maley, and I'll see you later.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
Hello and welcome to the Crow Podcast. My name is Grace McLeod.
And I'm Abby Francis. We will be your featured hosts for this episode.
Speaking of said episode, today's title is Daylight Savings Time. Should it still be a thing? Abby and I had the chance to speak with some extremely helpful and thoughtful voices on behalf of our topic.
We also deep dived into the history of daylight savings time and learned some interesting facts that the average person might not know. Like, did you know it's actually a myth that farmers are the reason why we use and follow daylight savings?
Honestly speaking, no. Not at first. But facts like these are why we became so interested in this topic in the first place. If this is a myth, then what is the reason behind us following the fallback and spring forward methods of daylight savings time? Is there a clear answer as to why? Or maybe even why BC and Canada in general still use it?
Which leads us into introducing our first guest. Calvin Kilpatrick is the office admin at Southlands Heritage Farm in Vancouver, BC. They were excited to speak on the farming perspective and continue to debunk the farmer myth linked with daylight savings time.
Here, at least, I've found it's not very helpful. But we're not like a huge working farm, especially this time of year, right? Like, we're not bringing in tons of crops because it's the dormant season. So moving the day a little earlier kind of doesn't matter to us because it's not like we have to be out there in the fields. But things aren't growing anymore. Everything's gone dormant. So moving the day earlier is not that helpful. Because it's not like we have to get started super early in the day to catch the daylight.
What Calvin is saying makes a lot of sense. However, there are a few things that they find to be a bit of a hassle as we exit daylight savings time here in the fall.
Because we're not just an agricultural farm, we're a riding barn. It's really worse for us because now that it's shifted so it gets dark earlier, a lot of our lessons are in the dark. And so we have to turn arena lights on, but it's not as great, and the horses can't see in the dark super well, and they have really bad depth perception, so shadows can freak them out because they can't tell how deep a hole is. If they see a shadow, they're like not sure if they can step in it or not because they can't tell how deep it is. So yeah, here I would say it's mostly a pain for us. I'm sure anyone with pets knows that animals get on a schedule and they know what the schedule is, and they don't understand that we've decided to turn the clocks forward or back when we do, and then we're just suddenly feeding them at a different time. But it's not the worst thing in the world. They just get pissed off and yell at us for a couple of weeks, and then they're like, no, it's fine. And they adjust to the new schedule. But if you'd come here around feeding time, you'd hear that rooster I was telling you about freaking out. You'd hear our goats freaking out. All the horses start to get antsy, our chickens, ducks, because everybody knows it's past time for breakfast.
As someone with a pet, I get this.
Same here.
Now the question lies with the business side of Southland Farms.
Southland has a unique quality to it. Not only are they a farm and riding barn, but they also have a school that runs on the property. This school runs with the normal school day times, which means that Heritage Farms doesn't even open their doors to the public until 3 p.m.
With the fall and winter times being in non-daylight savings, this can make things difficult.
On a business side, definitely the thing we have to worry about is how early it gets dark now because of, not just because of the shift. Obviously, the days are really short here. We're pretty far north relatively for the rest of the world. But it is a safety concern, especially with the littler kids, how dark it gets. For riding lessons, we do have lights out in the ring, but they don't cover everything. And so we try to move lessons earlier, but people can't, people have school during the week, obviously, so they can't come, right at 3 or whatever. So it can get harder to book those later lessons and keep them filled. And it's not like most seasonal businesses because we have animals that we need to keep fed year-round, even if people aren't as willing to book as they are in August when the days are super long and you can be out in the light at 9. So I would say a little bit. It can be a struggle to book those later lessons because it gets dark at 4. And we got to keep these horses fed through December, through January.
We asked Calvin their personal thoughts on daylight savings time.
It's everyone, right? The school kids are a bit tired because you get thrown off your sleep schedule. I guess for this one, you get an extra hour. But it just throws you off your routine a little bit, right? It's what everyone complains about is you're kind of tired and off because things aren't quite what they're supposed to be for, a couple of weeks and then you adjust. So It's like a little inconvenience for no benefit, in kind of my opinion.
Calvin's point of view had some really great insight into life on the farm and how time changes can affect not only the agricultural side, but the side of animals who are also influenced by the changes twice a year. They're a factor just like us.
That is very true, and I agree that it's not the first thing I think about when these time changes occur twice a year. It really is like adjusting to jet lag when you think about it. At least we aren't alone doing it.
Actually, that's partially true. There are some places in Canada and here in BC that no longer follow the time changes. Instead, they either remain in daylight savings time or out of the savings time. We spoke with Mike Bernier, MLA of Dawson Creek, and Brittany Anderson, MLA of Nelson and Creston. Their regions both do not follow the rest of BC in daylight savings.
So over a century ago, the Canadian Pacific Railway, decided to put the Valley and the East Kootenays into the Mountain Time Zone. So in Creston, we are in alignment with the rest of British Columbia during the summer. And then in the winter months, it's in alignment with Alberta. So as my aunt put it, she'd have to start an hour earlier when she was bringing the kids over for hockey, but when she was bringing them over for soccer in the summertime, we were on the same time zone.
And a similar story follows with Dawson Creek.
I think it was in the 70s, maybe even 1960s. There was a referendum held in the Peace region to not recognize daylight savings time. And when they did that referendum, the decision was made as part of the referendum process to choose a time zone. And the decision was at that time was made to follow the Mountain Standard time zone, and because of that, we don't recognize, if you look at Alberta, that's on Mountain Daylight Savings Time, British Columbia is on Pacific Daylight Savings Time. There are other parts of the province that are on, I think in the Cranbrook in that area, some of them are on Mountain Daylight Savings, so they always follow Alberta. There's other parts, I think, towards Creston or Fernie maybe, where they actually are on a different time zone as well. But yeah, in the Peace region, we chose way back when, and it's always kept that way, the Mountain Standard Time, which of course makes it very interesting, right? Because half the year we're the same as Alberta, half the year we're the same as BC, because when they follow daylight savings time, and we never change.
These two places aren't the only ones following this path in the Peace River and East Kootenay regional districts. Cities like Fort St. John and Fernie also do not follow the daylight savings. The Yukon, parts of Saskatchewan, and parts of Quebec do not follow the rest of Canada's daylight time either.
This, however, can and has created difficulties in time zone scheduling amongst the provinces and territories, seen as though the times are different.
Well, one of the hassles is everybody else is changing and we don't. And you always have to remember, no different than how we started off our conversation, is when I'm looking at my calendar, half my calendar is when I'm in Victoria, half is when I'm at home, and half the year they're the same and half the year they're different.
As we go from west to east, we know that there's going to be, time changes with different provinces. Certainly when you're trying to meet with some of the eastern provinces, it can make it a little bit trickier to make meeting times. And then when you get to a place like Newfoundland, especially that they're on the half an hour, that can be a little bit confusing. So my constituency is essentially split. When we're booking meetings, we always have to just make sure that we're really clear with, that making sure that when we're booking meetings that we're clear which time zone we're meeting at. If we're on a meeting with someone in Creston, we say, okay, should we set up a meeting tomorrow for 8 o'clock? So we just have to make sure that the communication is really clear.
Brittany and Mike seem to share and have similar difficulties within their regions.
Which leads us on to another point. Should we still continue switching the clocks twice a year or remain in one single time zone instead?
I will say not only my personal, but my political commentary is yes. We should stop. There's always some of the medical profession that says, we have to be concerned. There's always that body stress that some talk about when we change the clocks, that hour throws people off a little bit. If you think of, what happens when you travel, for instance, right? I would argue, though, that by not changing, from a commerce perspective, it makes a lot of sense. The challenge will be not across Canada. The challenge that we've always heard in British Columbia is a lot of the trading partners in the south are with the United States. So if you have us not changing, but then you have Washington State changes, then it'll be the same challenge that I'm going through, where half the year we would be the same as Washington, half the year not the same as Washington.
I certainly know that when we're looking provincially and when we surveyed British Columbians, and they were overwhelmingly interested in keeping daylight savings time, but that there was really clear feedback that they wanted to make sure that we were in alignment with the Yukon and the Western states as well. And right now we're not in alignment with the Yukon, but we do have legislation that has been passed in British Columbia, and we're essentially waiting for the US to be able to make that move so that we can make it all together. And so right now that we're waiting for approval for the House of Representatives in the US and then President Biden.
I know Washington, Oregon, and California have been talking about going away from daylight savings time, and whether they, it's like lock into one time zone. So whether it would be I think what we looked at in British Columbia is staying on Pacific daylight savings time forever. And we would stay there and just stay at that time zone and not change anymore in the winter time. I think it would make sense, but we actually passed legislation a couple of years ago in BC to stop recognizing the time changes. But the government put it into what's called regulation or policy, which means even though it passed in the chambers, it doesn't come into force until the Premier and Cabinet sign off on it. And their thought was they were waiting to see what the Western United States states did before they would decide. So I think the majority of the people want to see that. Most polls show that people want to see us stop. I think it's going to take a little bit of political courage and the first person to rip off the Band-Aid, so to speak, and just do it.
So I guess the question is as follows. If this change were to come, when would it fully come into effect?
I mean, to be blunt, even though we passed the legislation, I think it'll be a challenge because, again, the present government is very worried about, again, the message it sends to the United States and Canada being on different time zones. And federally in Canada, we have not had a wholesome discussion on doing it right across Canada. I think it would have, if the federal government just said, look, in Canada, let's just all make the decision, rip off the Band-Aid. None of us are going to follow a change time anymore. We're all going to just pick a time zone, whether it's the daylight saving or standard, everybody will just stay to one. I think at the end of the day, that would be the right way to go, but it needs some political will as well. Might have made sense 80 years ago, 100 years ago when it was first brought in. I will say the process globally has outlived its purpose.
Wow, what a really great and powerful, articulate quote to end on.
Honestly, I agree. All of our guests on this episode have really rounded our topic, and I don't know about you, Abby, but I learned a lot. Maybe more than I expected, but so grateful to all that we had gotten the chance to learn about.
It's truly been a fun and interesting subject to dive into. I now see daylight savings time on a whole other level than I did before.
I 100% agree.
Before we bring this episode to a close, we want to end it on a question. What do you think? Should we continue falling back and springing forward each year?
Or do you think we should stay in one time zone altogether?
That's the end of our episode today. We thank the guests who took the time to chat with us on this topic.
We hope we taught you some new things and maybe even have you thinking differently when we turn those clocks forward in the spring. I'm Grace McLeod.
And I'm Abby Francis, and we thank you for tuning in and taking the time to listen.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Hello everyone, this is 1680 The Crow. I'm Sean Park and this is your 12:30 news update. Starting with news coming straight from BCIT, yesterday there was an annual general meeting at the BCIT Burnaby Campus. Reporter Kobe Smith has more information about the meeting and why it is held.
The annual general meeting happens in November within 6 months of the fiscal year ending in May. Celine L'Oreal, the president of BCIT Student Association, explains about the AGM.
The purposes of an annual general meeting, or AGM, accomplishes a couple of our objectives. We are incorporated as a not-for-profit under BC law, and this requires us to hold an annual general meeting once per year. We consider improvements to our rules and procedures, receive an update on the audited financial statements, and hear the Executive Director's annual management report for the organization.
This gives an opportunity for council members and students to hear about the updates about BCIT and also about the rising cost in tuition. Kobe Smith, 1680 The Crow.
Moving to news in BC, Vancouver City Council's latest report says the Vancouver Police Department would need an additional $2.47 million to cover adjustments to fringe benefits and other $3.6 million for overtime expenses. The report says that a large part of the overtime costs come from the number of deployments to the encampments on East Hastings streets and the increasing number of protests. The city staff also recommends around $6 million to cover the fire department's fringe benefits and overtime costs as well. The report explains that they do not have a contingency set in place within the budget to manage these one-time pressures of increased costs. One local nonprofit is helping to solve food waste and insecurity by redirecting food from restaurants and grocers to other nonprofits. Reporter Kaylin No has the story.
Vancouver Food Runners uses app technology and a team of volunteers to pick up surplus food once a week that those in need can access from nonprofits across the city. Michelle Reining, the executive director of Vancouver Food Runners, says they redirect 100,000 pounds of food every month.
Right now in BC, 1 in 7 households are food insecure. The food donations are used in community meals, food hampers, or even for direct food provision.
They also have drop-offs to community fridges where individuals can access food within certain neighborhoods. Caitlin No, 1680 The Crow.
Moving on to national news, a Liberal MP is taking back on their comment after he questioned if there was a link between the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and a fatal shooting in Manitoba. Ken Hardy is the MP for Metro Vancouver. He says it wasn't appropriate.
There was no direct link, none whatsoever, and so in that respect, posting it that way was, entirely inappropriate on my part. I did not know that that's the way it would be taken, but that's the reality that some people have. So yeah, I do apologize for that.
Previously, Hardy said he would not apologize and meant what he said. His changes came after meeting the government House leader, who told him his comment was absolutely inappropriate. In stateside, a fake woman generated using the help of artificial intelligence has made Microsoft and Amazon drop out of the upcoming software conference. Edward Sizov is the organizer of the Divertini Software Conference. He says he admits that one of the featured speakers was auto-generated, but he intended to mask the worse-than-expected level of diversity of speakers. He refused to apologize in a series of posts on X, formerly known as Twitter. Looking at the weather now, the fog advisory ended just before noon, but it is still looking a bit foggy outside, similar to yesterday. It's hard to tell with the fog, but today there will be a mix of sun and a cloud with a high of 6 and a low of 1. The air quality right now is at 1 and the UV index is also very low, which is super ideal for outdoor activities if it weren't for the fog, clearing people's visibilities. There may be a chance of rain this Thursday through next Monday. Tomorrow is looking like a mix of both sunny and cloudy. Temperatures expected to be a high of 6 and a low of 1. I'm Sean Park, and that's it for 12:30.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Trettenero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
Microlink, connecting you with your BCIT community. Hello everybody, my name is Tatiana Yakovleva and you're listening to the fall episode of Microlink. Microlink is a podcast brought to you by the BCIT Student Association. Personally, I think fall is an exciting time, and I'm actually excited to introduce a new voice to this podcast. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which BCIT's main campuses are located is a traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the shared traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam First Nations. Today, we're joined by Sean Park, one of my coworkers, and Nick Dechev, a professor at University of Victoria. But being a professor is not the only thing Nick is occupied with. Today, we will be learning about what Victoria Hand Project is, how Nick's master's project helped found it, and where it is at today. In order to do it justice, I will let Sean take it away from here.
Hello everybody, I'm here with Nick Dechev. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Nick Dechev. I am the founder and currently Chief Technical Officer of Victoria Hand Project.
Seems like you have a lot of things going on. Let's start with your background in robotics. You teach at UVic, correct?
Yes. Now, I'm not currently teaching robotics. I do teach engineering design. And I teach a variation of that, which is, mechanics of machines, so that sort of thing. So it's very much close to robotics. And I have extensive robotics experience from my PhD. But yeah.
And speaking of, how has the robotics field changed and grown throughout your career in the field? And as a PhD professor, you're very knowledgeable in this field. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So just to clarify, the Victoria Hand, which we'll be talking about shortly, although it's based on, mechanical principles, it's not technically robotic because the Victoria Hand doesn't use any electric components by design. However, I know quite a bit about robotic prosthesis. I've been following it for, 27 years. My master's was in robotic prosthesis at University of Toronto. But we decided to take the Victoria Hand in a slightly different direction, which is just mechanical only.
Right.
But the field is advancing. The main advancements in robotic prosthetics are pretty much challenges on controlling them. That is to get the desires of the person wearing the prosthesis. How do you get someone's desire? What's in their head? Like, I want to do this. How do you get that into the machine? So that is some of the most challenging stuff, and that's where the most innovation has happened in the last 10 to 15 years. The machines themselves, however, there's some really cool ones out there, but they, actually haven't advanced that much. There's some refinements here and there, but I'd say the mechanical, electromechanical part of prosthesis has been the same for a while.
Right, and you briefly mentioned that robotics is not associated with Victoria's Hand project because it's mostly mechanical. So can you tell me more about the organization and what does mechanical really mean to an average person?
Sure, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so okay, well, I'll tell you a bit about Victoria Hand in general, and then you might understand why we've chosen the mechanical only aspect. So when we started, Victoria Hand is in fact based on my master's work from 1998 to 2000 at the University of Toronto. And I worked inside a prosthetic clinic in a place called Sunnybrook Hospital, and got a lot of feedback about what prosthetics looks like, just coming up to the year 2000 and how it can be improved. And like probably hundreds of other students across the world, I decided to take a journey into prosthetic development. So I created this interesting mechanical hand, and it did finish my work. And then over the years, it after we published a paper on it, it generated a lot of interest on the mechanics of it, not the robotics, but the mechanics of it, how it worked. Roll forward 12 years later, it was about 2012, and like many projects done, they sit in shelves for years. And sometimes other technologies have to catch up to make an old project work well. I think we can see that with computing these days with a lot of new technology. So some students found the hand. They said, "Hey, Dr. Dechev, we'd like to 3D print this." And I said, "Oh, 3D printing that'll never work. It's not strong enough." And they said, "No, it's really, really good." And I'm like, "I don't believe it." And so they said, "Can we try?" I said, "Of course you can try." So they 3D printed a very crude version of the 1999 hand. They brought it to me, and we were playing around with it, and I was actually shocked to see how strong it was. I couldn't believe it. And this was on a cheap $2,000 printer. And that's when kind of the beginnings of the Victoria hand were born. So we took an old design that was proven and published, and we converted it into a 3D printed design. And that took almost a year and a half, because you can't just print exactly the same way it's made. We got some grant money, and we started the Victoria hand in Guatemala in 2014 as a research project. And it wasn't even called the Victoria hand back then. We just called it the 3D printed prosthesis. It had no name. And here's the moment where it got interesting. So it's a very lengthy process to write an application to do testing with people. There's a lot of human ethics involved, and you have to make sure that things work okay. And if anything goes wrong, what's your plan? So that's called, human research ethics. And we did that, and we ran the study with about 15 people in Guatemala. And at the end of the study, remember, this is our version 1.0 hand. At the end of the study, people were like, "Can we please keep this?" And we were shocked, because we didn't expect it to survive or to do well.
Right.
And we're like, "Oh, that's not in the plan." I mean, the plan is you try it, and then
yeah, it's a prototype.
Yeah, it was just a prototype, right? Replicated 15 times, for these different people. And so we said, okay, well, hold on, we're going to make some improvements from the feedback, and then we'll come back and we'll give you an updated version based on all the feedback, because things didn't go perfectly. Sometimes we had a broken finger here and there, and so forth. And so we ended up fitting these people again, and at that point, there was a lot of discussion in the room, like, "Hey, is this just research, or are we're fitting people and they're taking these home and they're using them? That's not research. It's foreign aid." So
it's doing it.
Yeah. So to make a long story short, we talked with the University of Victoria, and we said what we're doing, and we all agreed that it would be best to spin out this research project into a not-for-profit, which we did. And that was in 2015, and that's when Victoria Hand was born. That's when we had to name it something. And when we had to name the organization, we called it Victoria Hand Project, because we're engineers and we can't come up with anything more interesting.
It's straightforward and does the job.
That's right. So that's where Victoria Hand is from. And just to get back to your question on robotics, I think you can see through that story that because it's majority of it is 3D printed, it lends itself to be more mechanical than electronic. And when we were working in Guatemala, I, to this day, remember being in it was very kind for some of the amputees to invite us to their homes, because usually they come to the hospital, right? And they invited us, to go and visit them. And they didn't have running water, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have anything. They're just living in, one lady and her 2 kids were living in a kind of a brick building, earth floor, 3 walls and an outdoor stove. So, the idea of electricity, or, even charging batteries and she liked to wash clothes. And so the prosthesis is perfect because it's waterproof, because we made it with 3D printed material and metal. And so we realized that in developing countries, sometimes, the latest tech, the infrastructure isn't there and it's not what people need. And so from there on, Victoria Hand continued to be mechanical only, and I'll tell you more about it later.
Well, that's very interesting. And what other site work have you done besides Guatemala?
Well, when we were working in Guatemala, one of my students, and when I say students, these are typically 3rd year or 4th year engineers. and mechanical engineers, and biomedical engineers, and they all came to volunteer their time. So there's some of the top students. They were really excited about the project. So two of them, Pranay and Pranav, were from Nepal, and they were working on the project for quite some time. And one day, Pranay came up to me and he said, "Listen, Dr. Dechev, I'm Nepalese." And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know." I don't ask people their heritage because it doesn't matter to me. I mean, you're either good at what you do, and that's the bottom line, right? And so he said, "There's a great need in Nepal," and he said, "My father works at an orthopedic hospital in Nepal and in Kathmandu, and can we bring the Victoria Hand Project there?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not sure." And we applied for some more grant money and we got it, and then we expanded to Nepal, and from Nepal we also expanded into Cambodia. And then, people just through networking alone, about a year later, we got connected with Enable Community Foundation in the US, and they had heard about our hands and they had money, and together we expanded into Haiti. And then we went into Ecuador. And when I say expand, it wasn't like a one-shot thing. Like, we actually would fundraise, we would get 3D printers, we would do a trip, we would train them, and we'd partner with professional prosthetists. So suddenly, within a few years, we were in 5 countries, and word of mouth just kind of kept spreading. We got more grants. We got a Google grant in 2017, which really helped elevate the work into Egypt and into Uganda. And then we had an opportunity to expand into Kenya, which we did. I'm forgetting a country. I know I am. So we just kept growing. I mean, right now we have 9 countries that are very stable that we work in. Each country has like at least 3 or 4 printers. They have trained staff. We have a constant flow of materials going to each country, and they fit people. Every amputee has very unique needs. It's not a matter of just having a missing limb. And just to be clear, Victoria Hand only does upper limb. There's when someone says the word amputee, it's well known that about 9 out of 10 amputees, that means people who have a limb loss, have a lower limb loss. 90% of amputees are lower limb patients. So only 10 or 15% are upper limb. So we only work with upper limb people, and there's several reasons for that. But what that has allowed us to do is to become experts, really, really good at doing just that. And upper limb loss is quite complex as well. There's if you have an upper limb loss at your wrist or at your forearm or higher on your forearm or past your elbow, there's different ways you have to treat that with prosthesis. And so that's all we do. Yeah. Because upper limb loss is so unique, and without getting into too many details, there was one boy in Kenya, that Michael Perrone, who's currently CEO of Victoria Hand. We were just perplexed. We're like, how are we going to fit this child with a prosthesis? Because he had double limb loss and also leg loss. He'd been in an accident, and the anatomy of his limbs was really challenging to fit. But we're engineers, and it took a bit of time, so we couldn't fit him right away. But we developed it, and because we established those partnerships on the ground in the country. Once we tried something here, we tested it, we made sure it worked. Then we sent them the digital files, and we walked them through fitting him, and they eventually fit him. And then we learned from that. So now when people have that same type of limb disfigurement, we can fit them too. And we just recently fit a fellow in Ukraine, in Vinnytsia, who had the same, this man is much older, but it was the same type of limb issue. And we're like, oh, we've done this before. Let's train our partners on how to do this. And we did. And he was fit in a matter of a week. So yes, we have special cases, we learn, and we keep adding to our digital collection of ways to fit people. Yeah.
Embrace the magic of winter at BCIT Student Association's second annual Winterfest. Over 20 vendors to suit your holiday needs with student-friendly pricing. Join us Wednesday, November 15th, 2023 from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Be a part of the action in the Great Hall. Don't miss it. Brought to you by the City of Burnaby and the BCIT Student Association. Visit bcitsa.ca for more details.
And speaking of Ukraine, I know that you provided some aid and leave. Can you tell us more about that? I know it's a little different expanding into a country that is in an active war. How did that change your process?
Well, first of all, it was a very big decision to do that. We've never worked in a country prior to that was in a state of war. That's not who we are. We're engineers. We're not doctors. This is not something like MSF. We had a long discussion about whether it was okay for us to do that. I think with Ukraine, we ultimately decided that because it is such a vast country, it is a huge country, that if we were on one side of it, far away from the active areas of conflict, the risk would be lower. Obviously, there's missiles and bombs dropping everywhere, but we saw the huge need, and we were asked a number of times by people. We never push our way into places. Like, we just get requests, and after several requests, we ended up networking and making a partnership. We only do our partnerships through networking, and we found two suitable partners. And I did a exploratory trip in February this past year to meet them. And I felt that they would be great partners. It was relatively safe. And then we went back in June, and we actually outfitted both clinics with a whole bunch of printers, and so it's working now. It's getting supplies in is very long and slow, very long. But that's what it is. So.
Is there any country that you're foreseeing a future expansion, or is it just whatever that comes through networking and connections that you can establish along the way?
It's all through networking. So people in the prosthetics community in Canada and the US, but especially the US as well, know who we are. We're friends with many of the top prosthetists. And, we were just down in the American Prosthetics Conference in Indianapolis in September, and we were there for about 5 days, and just met with some of the leaders and prosthesis. We're chatting, and people know what we do. We also did a presentation there, and I think networking is the best way, because it's all about human interaction and connections, and so I think that's a very organic process. I forgot to mention a country. We were actually in Pakistan. We established a clinic. They built a brand new hospital there in, I think it's Karachi. And Michael and Kim, two of our team members, went over there in May. I guess 2 months before I went to Ukraine, and they established a full system over there. So they have it's a full, usually we get a room or two different rooms, and it's full of equipment in terms of 3D printing, assembly, computers, everything to do the Victoria hand on site. So yeah, we're also in Pakistan. But you're asking about future plans? Not really. Anywhere we expand, we have to fundraise, because it's just, each country is so unique. We like to keep it the same, but each country is really unique with its own challenges. So, yeah.
Right. And speaking of fundraising, is the project currently sustainable? Is there an established grant of revenue that comes in, or is this something that has to be a challenge every step of the way?
No, there's no steady, I wish there was, but there's no steady income. What I will say is that there's a lot of interest. When we fundraised for Ukraine, we had a very specific campaign that we did on social media. And there was an incredible amount of support. So, we met our goal, and we're very proud to say that, all those funds went exactly where we said they would go, because, that's what we do. I don't get a dollar out of Victoria Hand, not a single, never in my life, all these years, because I'm paid by the University of Victoria. In fact, every year I probably lose a few $1,000 because I don't bother to expense things. It's too much hassle. So I buy and I give, and I give my time, so yeah, no, it will continue to be usually on a project-to-project basis. That's how we fundraise. But because Victoria Hand goes and establishes in those countries, you're asking me about sustainability. It is sustainable. The doctors in Ukraine, or the prosthetists, or the doctors in Pakistan, they're funded by their hospital, right? They're employees of that's why we only partner with hospitals or clinics, because they're already there. They're already being paid. And so really, when you think about it, our model is all we're doing is supplying the designs, the ideas, and then to start them up, we supply the printers, but then the printers are there, they're working. And because there's 4 of them or 5 printers, they last, if one goes down, it doesn't matter. There's another 3 running, right? So, and they're very easy to service. Everything has been designed from 2014, 2015, from the beginning with sustainability. What happens if the power goes? What if this component breaks? What if this piece of the prosthesis breaks? Well, the person visits the clinic, which is only maybe an hour away, and they print a new piece and they put it in, and it's done. It works. It's about making the prosthesis on site in the country, because then it's easy for everyone. The amputees, it's low cost. 3D printing a little latch maybe on the wrist, it's like 10 cents. It's a completely different model. Is you build on site. It's kind of like IKEA, except except the parts come out of a printer, if that makes sense.
That does, and I know that model specifically works for developing countries, or countries that have potential to not have as many resources, like what you've mentioned about lights going out. How does this issue of amputees not having prosthetics translate to Canada? Is this something that Canadians face as well, or is it like a different issue? Or is it the same issue, but is it presented in a different manner?
It's different. So Canada is a very interesting system in terms of prosthetic and orthotic care. In Canada, for instance, the policies to help an amputee vary on a provincial basis. So if you are in Prince Edward Island, there is no prosthetic coverage, period. That's it. In British Columbia, you are allowed to receive 1 prosthesis to satisfy the minimum need. And that's a very important proviso. I'll talk about that in a second. Every 3 years. I'm giving you the simplified version. There's a bit more detail, like you can read the policies. It's actually every 3 to 5 years, and there's some, a bit of leeway. You actually make an application. So if you're an amputee in BC or Alberta or Ontario, you meet with a prosthetist, you talk, you fill out an application. It goes to something called PharmaCare here, and a review board reads it, and then they decide if they'll fit the person based on if it's been 3 years or so, and then what type of device they'll fit. And that's where the minimum need comes in. So you do not get the state-of-the-art, $50,000 prosthesis here. That will not be funded in British Columbia. What you get is usually a hook, or you get a nice myoelectric arm, but it's the low grade. Like it's like a $12,000, $15,000 arm. And they're quite nice, actually. I don't mean to demean it by saying it's low grade. In fact, I want to take that back. It's the minimum device that meets the need, but it's not as advanced as some of the stuff you see on Discovery Channel or anything like that. Not like that.
Of course, and we're talking about devices that meet minimum needs for physical needs in order to have a person function in the best and in the most able way possible. but is there still some stigma and negative interpretation that is associated with prosthetics and amputees in general?
In Canada, in the US, in Europe, I would say no. I think that what we have done as a society in these countries, the ones I've just named, is from childhood age, we've explained that people have differences. And so, you'll teach children to say that people have limb differences, right? There's all sorts of acceptance. And so what happens is people are who they are, and it's not a problem. And that has been a concerted effort over, a generation or two to do that. And I think we've achieved that because I certainly see amputees all the time in Canada, and they're like, yeah, I got no arm. And it's not a big deal. They can have a job, they can have employment. Nobody, people aren't pointing at them. In Guatemala or Nepal, it's completely different. Completely. It's a shame. In Haiti, there's the stories that we got. One of them was so crazy that we actually had to verify it. We heard the story and we thought, let's just verify it because this sounds so crazy. But we found the source and we talked to them. And so basically in Haiti, for instance, the bus drivers won't stop or taxis won't stop. They see you have a missing limb because it's bad. It's a belief system. It's like the person's cursed. They don't want them in the vehicle. You don't get jobs. In Guatemala, I remember the boy I spoke with and his father, we gave him a prosthesis, and the man said, listen, thanks for the prosthesis. It'll help my son. I appreciate it. He goes, but what my son really needs is a job. He's lucky, he gets straight A's in school, but the best job he can get is he picks watermelons in the fields. I have so many stories. I don't want to waste your time, but I remember this one in particular. And I remember every person I've ever met, actually, vividly. And so he said, he picks watermelons. That's the best job he can get. And the end of the season, as they're starting to get less and less need for pickers, they fire him first because he's the amputee. It's very different way of thinking throughout the world. And maybe we could look at that here in the West, and we can be judgmental about that and say, oh, that's terrible. But you can look at the other way around. People need to survive in these low-income countries. And so I don't think it's right that he's let go first, but they need to be efficient and make money and survive and feed their families. And so it's very difficult for amputees in other countries, very difficult. So, if our prosthesis in any way can help them get employment, that's like our top criteria. Anything. In Nepal, the ladies that we fit, if the prosthesis is black, they will not touch it. They will not wear it. Black means death. It has to be painted, and they cover themselves and they cover their hands, and sometimes they put little strings and braid it, and they'll wear little gloves on their prosthesis, and then you can't tell that it's not an artificial hand anymore. So they have the body image. They feel whole because they have two arms and hands, and they're able to carry a bag or to carry a purse or whatever, and they feel whole, but they don't want anyone to know that they're an amputee. I could talk for hours on it. I won't. I think you get the idea.
But I still really appreciate your time, and thank you for what you do. It helps physically and also helps out mentally as well. I think it does help bridge that gap. Unfortunately, there's probably a long way to go, but it definitely helps. Is there anything that you would like to highlight, any people that you work with, or promote Victoria's Hand Project before we go?
Yes, absolutely. So to be very clear, the Victoria Hand Project is a team. It has always been a whole team of people. I want to highlight, Michael Perrone, who has been with Victoria Hand since 2015. He started as a co-op student, and then he graduated and, became just an engineer, and then became the chief operating officer. And finally, I promoted him and changed my role, and he became the CEO. There's Kelly Knights, and she's currently the chief operating officer, and she was with us since 2017. And then there's Kim Arkell, and Kelly is an engineer as well. And then there's Kim, who's our mechanical systems lead. She's been with us since 2019 or 2020. we have Michelle, and then we have dozens of people who've worked with us over the years as engineers who've gone on to other careers, and we still keep in touch with all of them. I would say there's probably 30 engineers that have helped contribute to the Victoria Hand. Some of the brightest people I know. And all that info is on our website. We have a list of previous members, and so people can go and check out who has helped. And every year we accept 6 co-op. It's called co-op students. They're like a 4-month work term where they work full time for 4 months. We have 6 per year that work with us. So we're always bringing in new people, volunteers, and so I want to acknowledge all of these people because without them, Victoria Hand wouldn't exist. There's just too much work, and their dedication and their time makes it all possible.
We'll put the link to your website in the description, but thanks again for your time.
That was Sean Park interviewing Nick Detchev about the Victoria Hand Project. Thank you so much for joining us today for Microlink. What did you think of this episode? Please don't hesitate to reach out to give your feedback. For more information about what LINK and BCIT Student Association does, please visit linkbcit.ca. That is linkbcit.ca. You will be able to find our contact information on the website. And if you get bored, the website also has plenty of articles and podcast episodes to occupy your time. But that is going to be it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.